Yeah, we're live. It is 7:21, and I got a mosquito bite. I got munched down by something when I was out there working on the sprinklers. Today we want to talk about cylinder heads, and I got a excuse me, got a very specific question today. Who was today? It might have been yesterday. At any rate, we got a question, and the question was, or the comment was, because it wasn't a question. It was a statement of facts. Here's one thing. Here's a little bit of advice. So if somebody ever comments something on something that you posted and there's like a ... or that their comment ends with the word facts, you can rest assured that it's not a fact. It should say not facts, because everyone that I've ever read like that has not in fact been facts. But the point is, and I'm hoping to clear all of this stuff up, the comment was on a video that I did where we compared 317 heads to 706 heads. So we did that on a 5.3. I didn't compare the 317 heads on the larger 6-liter. We did compare the 799 heads, which made a little bit more peak power, past like 5,000 RPM on the 6-liter than the smaller 706 heads. When we tested them on the 5.3, the smaller heads were just better. And compared to a 317 head, which has more flow, and that's what I want to talk about tonight, is 317 head has more flow because it had about equal flow to the 799 and 243 heads. It just has a bigger chamber, so it has lower compression, and it has a different chamber design, which is not supposed to, I'm told, not supposed to be as efficient. So even if you were to mill the head and bring the compression down, which this test has been done, they were then comparing it to 243 heads, and it didn't make the same power as a 243 head, even when milled down to equalize the compression. It didn't make the same power. So that tells us that the chamber design has an effect on power. Pretty standard. I mean, I think we all kind of understand that. But it also goes to tell you, there's always this complaining about, oh, well, one of those has higher compression, blah, blah, blah. So, but the comment was very specific, not just about the cylinder head, because we've seen that test, and I've tested that over and over again. And every time we run the 317 head on something that has lower compression, it makes less power NA, and then it makes less power at any given boost level. We did that on the 317 and the 706 head, and that's exactly what they did. It made less power NA, so if we ran 10 pounds of boost on them, it still made less power, because the one that was making more NA power, that larger amount of NA power gets multiplied by the 10 pounds of boost, and then it ends up making more boosted power. That's what has happened. So we understand that. So we understand one of them has more, the 317 has more flow. It has less compression. It's a different chamber design. And so when tested back to back against the smaller chamber, smaller valve, smaller port, different style chamber, 706 head, it makes less power. So now we add a turbo to the equation. So we run boost. And so this person's point, and seemingly it's a valid point because he said facts on it, so we know that it's true. But seemingly it's a valid point because he said, well, if you run 10 pounds or 15 pounds or 20 pounds, that the 317 is going to make more power. Thinking that now, because, and I'm sure that the thought process here is that now that the 317 head, the airflow rate of the 317 head, which flows more than the 706 head, now that we're utilizing that extra airflow, now it will come into play. The question becomes, first of all, does it do that? Or do we just continue to see the multiplier effect because it makes less power, and now we're multiplying it by 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, is the multiplier effect still working? Does that happen? And the other question would be, if it does, at what point does it happen? So if we have a turbo that's capable of making 1,000 horsepower and we run it on those combination, like a 5.3 or whatever, that even if we ran out a 6-liter, but that's those two heads, one of those heads makes more power than the other. The 706 makes more power. If we then multiply that by boost, we get a bigger spread in power. So just so you remember, when I did the test on the 317 head versus the 706 head, the 706 head made like 20 horsepower more and more than 30 foot-pounds of torque. Obviously, down low, we can attribute some of that to compression, not all of it. But remember, it also has a smaller valve. The chamber actually fits the bore size. It has a different chamber design. It has a smaller port volume. So it has a lot of other things that nobody ever says anything about. It's all about the static compression. And in this case, that would be justified. This is a dramatic change in compression between a 70 cc 317 head or 71 or 72, however big they get. There's some production tolerances in what the chambers will be, but it's going to be, you know, let's say it's going to be 10 more than a 706 head. That's a lot. So we have a lot more compression, but we have changes, the other changes also that I mentioned. So the question becomes, will we, in fact, this should be our poll. Okay, on a Turbo LS, will the 317 heads ever make more power than the 706 heads under boost? That will be our poll. So we know, here's all the data that we know because we've tested this many times, not just once. We know the 706 heads run on the same combination, same camshaft, intake manifold, yada, yada, yada. We know the 706 head makes more power than the 317 head. We know that when we add boost to it at any reasonable kind of boost level, 7 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, that the multiplier effect still works and that the combination that made more power NA continues to make more power under boost. So the question isn't that. All of that's true. We know that that's true. I know because I have lots and lots of data that supports that shows exactly that. So the question is, this is the nitpicking part. Can we go beyond that and get to a point where not only does here's what would have to happen if it's going to make more power. The airflow gains offered by the 317 head, which is bigger, it's a bigger port, it's a bigger valve, it's a bigger chamber. The airflow gains, you'd have to get to a point where the airflow gains are beneficial, and not just beneficial, but beneficial enough to offset all of the gains from the compression and other things with that head, to offset all of that, and therefore then offset all the multiplier now that's stacked on top of that. Because remember, as we go up in boost, at no boost, we had like 20 horsepower and 30 foot-pounds. At 7 pounds or 15 pounds, we have way more than that. So it's not having to just overcome the NA thing. It's having to overcome all the multiplier effect too. So again, when you're answering the question, will that ever happen? Will it ever be able to overcome that? And this guy obviously was a 317 owner, and I understand that, and I understand you representing for the 317 mafia. That's okay. I understand that, and I totally get it. But whether or not that's accurate is another question. And the only way to find that out is to not just because it's not going to happen at 1,000 horsepower. I can tell you that. So it's going to have to happen. If it would happen, it's going to have to happen some point beyond that. Like, where does that stock head become a restriction, and the other stock head also not become a restriction? So at some point, the stock head will be restrictive, and then ported heads would help a lot more power because they make more NA power too. But at some point, that's definitely going to happen. So we're looking at, okay, we know all this below here is true. We know this is true. We're only changing the flow rate, not a lot. And so does it have this sweet spot in the middle where the 317 would achieve more power and overcome all of the other stuff that we know is happening before it eventually just loses out because it doesn't flow enough, because we're already at 1,500 horsepower, 2,000 horsepower, wherever that number is. So that is the question. And I'm sure that this person that made this statement hasn't looked at it in depth like that. They haven't. They might not understand it, and they're not, and which is why I'm doing these kinds of videos, because I hope to help them understand this, that what you're saying is not just because what he thinks he's saying is that, well, it's just there's more airflow, and so therefore it at some point it's going to be better. And I understand that logic. I'm not certain that I agree with that logic. I'm not certain that that window that we get to that window where it's already useless for us to have a stock head, and then where the 317 overcame all that stuff, because it's not just got to equal it, it's got to overcome all that stuff. And so does it overcome that before they just both get to be, hey, look, there you really need different heads in here, because for one, the deck thickness isn't big enough anyways, but more flow obviously is going to help the thing. So that's my question for today. Is that going to happen? Do we get to that point? So let me know in the comments, guys that are watching this, guys that are here on the live feed, guys that are watching this that are not on the live feed. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you think, and here is really, I think, part of the problem is that in this, whenever Richard does a video on something that worked better than something else, I hurt the feelings of the thing that it worked better than. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be another camshaft, could be another intake manifold. When I do the videos on the intake manifold, the shiny, fabricated one, and all the guys that have bought that because it looks awesome and it looks so much better than a truck manifold, and they bought it and they're quick to defend it. Oh yeah, no, it actually, mine has instant boost response and mine works really well. I'm like, look, I'm not saying you made a bad choice, but that's the way that they're taking it. I'm just saying that if you compared that to a truck manifold or a Trailblazer SS or a Fast, it makes less power through a lot of the curve. Then it makes more power, just like a bigger camshaft does, just like all of those things. I'm not telling you that your baby is ugly. I'm just saying your baby's wearing overalls or whatever. I'm just a statement of fact. But the way that people take it is obviously different than that. But I have a question though. Do you guys think that will work? Do you think that we would get to that point before that crossover point where you just shouldn't be using those heads on that thing anyway? I mean, the ported set of 317 heads that we ran have made the most power. So all the 317 guys that are saying, oh, Richard hates our head or whatever, that's not the case. And that's what I was really getting at when I started on this tirade, is that if I was putting together a turbo LS and my LS came with 317 heads, I would just use those. I mean, they're not going to come on a 4.8 because I wouldn't put them on a 4.8. I wouldn't buy those and put them on a 4.8. I also wouldn't put them on a 5.3. There's no need to. Use the heads that you already have. If you have a 6-liter and it came with 317 heads, guess what? Those are turbo heads, and they'll work just fine. If you port them and mill them and change the compression, they'll work even better, be more responsive. All of that stuff will happen. And because you're only trying to get to some sort of reasonable power output, 7, 8, 9, 1,000 horsepower, whatever it is, you just use what you have. That's the least expensive way to go about it. And sure, it might be down on response a little bit compared to another head, but that doesn't matter. You have 1,000 horsepower turbo, and you're only going to make 1,000 horsepower, so you shouldn't be sweating the little things anyways. So just use what you have. And in a lot of cases, like at a 6-liter, I would use 317 heads, especially if I was doing it on pump gas, because they got a bigger tuning window. So there you go. We made the most power with 317 head. Richard has recommended 317s for pump gas stuff, not on 4.8s and 5.3s, but on 6.0s, on 6.2s also. I've recommended that just because you can, with a lower compression, you can have a bigger tuning window and you can run it on pump gas, and you'll still make way more power than you need. Way more power than you have traction, and way more power maybe than you could, certainly more power than your 4L60 is going to handle. So you can get all of that stuff done and not have to worry about changing the head. Even though I did a test that showed another head was better, it doesn't matter. You don't need that. So let's see what you guys got going on a Saturday night. Eric, Jeff, Skullman, Polo Marco, Guatemala. Awesome. Guatemala's in the house. Everybody say hi to Guatemala. Closed caption unavailable. I didn't select any of that. So, well, the shirt can't wait for to iron out the LT1 setup. I know I want to do more LT1 stuff. Headflow is the most important. BNR, what's going on? How much are the heads choking the engine? That's the question. We just went over that. Heads always matter. They always make a difference. The question is it worth the expense versus more boost? But that's not the question here. The question isn't we have one head, we have two heads that flow the same. One of them has higher compression. One of them makes more power. Or we don't have a situation where one head flows more than the other, and then they're the same otherwise, because that's not it. As I described, this is nuanced. It's not just a stock head versus a ported head. I would say pick the ported head because the ported head is going to make more power. But again, the question comes back to, hey, it circles back around. Hey, Richard, do I need a ported head? Are you trying to make 1,000 horsepower or less? Yes. Well, then you don't need a ported head. It will help, and you can do it probably at a lower boost level. But if you put the 1,000 horsepower turbo on there, you can make 1,000 horsepower. Just put a low buck truck camshaft in it, in your motor, and then turn the boost up, and you can make 1,000 horsepower. It's literally that easy. Getaway student, heads always matter. Yep. Except maybe they don't. Seems obvious, but lots of head flow with a small to mid-sized cam is far better. More power everywhere than a large cam with lower flowing heads. Yeah, I don't know that those were the two choices here. Heads make a difference. I don't think my engine would run without cylinder heads. That's good. Less boost used with horsepower goal achieved should result in better reliability. You think that running the same power output at a lower boost level changes reliability, or does it change detonation threshold? If you're running an intercooler and you have to run 1 more pound of boost, is that going to affect reliability at all? What are the best heads, 243 or 706? Your best heads for what? And then what is your definition of best? Depends on if you're going to crack the 706 heads. Again, another nuanced thing that's important, that some of the 706 heads are, I have had the 706 head crack. We ran it anyway. I didn't care, but they are prone to cracking. And so you can get a Castec or a non-Castec head, whichever one is the good one. And I think an 862 head is not prone to cracking. So if you want either one of those and you're worried about the 706 heads, get an 862 head, get it from a Gen 4 motor or whatever. Somebody else here is going to tell us what exact applications you need. But I'm really more concerned with the flow rate. But that's something to consider. If it's going to crack, you don't want to use it. I had 243s on my LS1, 232, 240 cam, and I made grade mid-range and top-end power under 2,500. It wasn't great. Maybe more tuning window clean things up, but it would surge at 1,800. That doesn't surprise me on LS1 with a 232 cam. Does a 317 come in iron and aluminum? The iron versions that came in the 99 and 2000 trucks are not designated 317. So technically it's not a 317, but I'm told that the head casting is at least very, very similar, if not the same. 862 heads, are they any good is the question. And yes, they're the same as a 706 head. Sounds like 317 heads are unrealistic at becoming better to me. Like I said, they have a really uphill battle, in my opinion. But if power is our only metric, but when choosing heads, that's not the only metric. That's the thing that I test on the engine dyno. But that's not the only thing that goes into a choice, which is why I've done obviously hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of camshafts testing or run different camshafts. And the camshaft that makes the most power is never what I recommend to somebody. Not never, almost never, because the most power is very, very rarely what people choose as their metric. I sell way more low buck truck cams than I do even the Truck Plus cams. And same thing with Brian Tooley. I'm sure that they sell, and all the cam companies sell way more small to small, medium size cams than they do the bigger cams. I guarantee you that that's the case, because there's way more guys. First of all, there's way more trucks on the road than all of the Camaros and Corvettes and all those combined. There's way more trucks. So people are interested in having truck cams, driver truck cams. Now they're going to sell way more of those than they are, high performance pieces. That's just the nature of the business. Size matters. Valve, chamber, runner, right head for the right build. The balance of volume and velocity. Multiplying inefficiency can only lead to more inefficiency. Yeah, all of those things can be discussed. Lucky for us, we have several metrics. We have the flow numbers directly off of it. We have valve measurements. We have port measurements. We have chamber measurements. And then we have data to show what the power output is, NA. And then we also have data to show what the power output is under boost. So we really have the whole spectrum of stuff that we need. So people can talk about the things that you're talking about there, and they want to argue about that stuff. And I'm like, look, there's no discussion about that. You can't just take variables and go, well, I think it's going to do this. Like, we don't have to think what it's going to do. We already know. We already have all of this data that tells us exactly what it is. There's no reason to go back and try to introduce speculation into the data that we already have. It's time to test it. I have already tested it. If you're talking about the thing that we're talking about. Oh, the iron versus aluminum. I agree, if that's what you're talking about. I do want to do that. And I thought that I had a set of iron heads coming my way, but I haven't seen them. If it makes more power NA, it will make more power under boost with less PSI. The 317 gives more forgiveness range before it goes boom. 317 Mafia needs to be assured. I agree, right? I could do a 317 with a circle and a line through it. All the 317 guys would be angry. But it's just like that. And the 317 guys, I think I probably hear less from those guys, because I think that even before I did that video and that test, I think guys were kind of already leaning toward, hey, that like particularly on a 4.8 and 5.3, that just like putting an LS9 camshaft in it, that kills power down low. And so it's not good for boost response. And so you shouldn't be changing the head that you have on there already. I don't think that they had gone through all the testing and had all the data to verify that. But enough guys had run that stuff to know, hey, look, this is not a very good way to go. There's no reason to take a 4.8 and put an LS9 camshaft in it and then put a 317 head on it and then put a short runner manifold on it, which I did a video on that kind of stuff. And all it does is make the turbo go, hey, I'll respond, I don't know, 5,000, 6,000 sometime later on. Dean, what's going on? Swapping a 6-liter LS is looking to be cheaper than putting AFR 185 cam roller conversion, tuning intake, exhaust, etc. A cam only 6-liter and 4 LED can be swapped for under $5,000. That's a good deal. And you're not going to be unhappy with a 6-liter and a cam. So 317 heads are lower compression but higher flow rate. Yeah, 317 head is basically the valve size and the port of a 799 or 243 head. So that's what they flow like. Richard, have you had to deal with loose LS timing chain problems, and have you ever ran a distributor in an LS? I haven't run a distributor. I honestly don't ever see a need for that. I don't even understand why somebody would have made that, given the fact that you already have the MSD ignition controller that runs the coil packs and all plugs right in. I don't know why you'd need to make a whole new thing to run a distributor in it, unless there's a class that requires a distributor maybe for that. Otherwise, I don't know why you would do that. But the loose timing chain problem is a universal LS problem. In fact, decades ago, we did talk to the timing chain manufacturers and pointing this out. We're like, look at all these timing chains. Oh no, that's a worn out one. I'm like, no, here's a worn out one, and here's a brand new one out of the box. And here's another brand new one, and here's a different manufacturer brand new one, and here's all of these timing chains right out of the box. Look, they're all sloppy. That needs to be addressed. Turbo 6 liters on top of my list. 10-to-1 compression, ring gap, truck Norris, and all the cooling. There you go. Victor Harbor, Chris is in the house. Good day. 6-liter LS is almost ready to assemble after collecting quality parts and hoping to make some decent power. Good. Tuning window. I like that. I like the ebony and ivory. Huh. Hello. 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 Hello, Bruno. Oh, you're Brady. What are you doing? Huh. Oh. I didn't even recognize you. I should have known it was you. You come up here more than your brother does. Huh. Holy Guatemala. Sounds like they may become better with extreme RPM, with boost or some mod to bring the compression up. Bigger cross-section of the runners, less concentrated energy at the valve, slower velocity of air. I did 317s on a 5.3, but do you think twin turbos will be better, although 900 horsepower is the window? The turbo situation, twins or singles, doesn't make any difference. You can make 900 horsepower easily with either one of those. So whichever one you think looks better or fits better is the answer there. And I don't think you needed 317s, but like we talked about, particularly on a 5.3, like an iron 5.3, like an LM7 or something that already has a dish piston in it, I don't think that I would do that. I think I would just run the heads that were on there. A 317 head on one bank and a 706 on the other. There you go. Then we just stand on one side or the other of the motor, depending on who we're talking to about what's cool, right? We could make everybody happy. Or, since it's the internet, we can make nobody happy. 241s came on the first LS1, then 243s came on the LS6, L33, 706s on the 4853s. 373, 873 on an LQ4, 035, 317s on the LQ9. 317s also came on the LQ4s. Cam for L92, 6,000 RPM, max RPM on an Airboat. I don't know what. 6,000. You should look at the 6-liter videos that I have up and kind of see the L92 will be the same. It's going to be something in the mid to high 220s at 50 and below for what you're doing. When you run these airboats, and if 6,000 is the max RPM, are you concerned with throttle response and the power curve? Like, are you concerned with the power output as it revs up? Like, I don't know how fast these things rev up. Are they like a jet boat where it just goes to almost the max RPM right away? And then it takes a while for the prop to grab the air. So you got to give me more information on that to see. I think I would be more concerned or less concerned with peak power unless it goes right to peak RPM like a jet boat does. Less chance of boost leaks. Yeah, again, I think that's more of a nitpicky thing. That I'm not concerned with boost leaks, because if you're talking about 1 pound or whatever, or even 2 pounds, that's not going to be the make or break difference. Best equals more horsepower in a 6-liter. Is it more peak horsepower, more average horsepower, or peak torque? .243 or 706 head, which gives better response horsepower? You could take a look at the video that I did. I tested both of those heads. I tested a 799 head, but it's exactly the same as a 243 in terms of power output. So on a 5.3, the 706 head made more power everywhere. So that wasn't a choice there. They were close, but there isn't a choice. Honestly, if I had a 5.3 with 243 heads on it, I wouldn't put 706 heads on it. I would just run the 243s. If you wanted more power, mill the head or port the head. There are other things that you could do rather than changing the head. So I would just do that. On the 6 liter, the 799 heads made more peak power by 10 or 12 at the top, but they made less power on the way up to about 5,000. I was told that reducing the quench distance of piston to head is more important than lowering compression for boost. You might be talking about softening the chambers, and I don't know what you mean by thoughts. I don't know. I purposely wanted to keep torque down in hopes to not break stuff. I don't know. Also live in high altitude. Should have put that in the equation. Yeah, you can get away with a lot more of a lot of things at higher altitudes. You can get away with more compression and stuff. What stall converter would you recommend on a 6 liter with recommend port heads and ProCharger? I don't know. The stall converter is really going to be a camshaft question. And then also what you're doing with it. And then where you want this thing to make power. A lot of guys that have ProChargers, a centrifugal blower, rev these things fairly high. So, and they don't make a lot of boost down low. So if you're drag racing it, a higher stall is definitely going to help you kind of get into the boost, into the happy boost area. Shadow ops, I agreed. If they should, the application is one of the questions that I always ask when what they're doing with it, because even if they have the same motor and want to make the same power, if it has a different application, if it's towing, if it's daily street use, if it's street strip or whatever, that's an important question. Their usage is going to depend. You know, it's going to affect that decision. Just finished working on an old Galebanks modified 97 F350 dually, 7.3 liter direct injected engine. Only had 10 psi boost, ran faster than the modern Cummins 6.7 with 32 pounds. I don't really know much about those engines, about those two. That doesn't sound right to me, unless the motor was modified and one of them was getting way more fuel than the other would. Stupidest parts combo might be fun testing. I did that. We took a 4.8 and I did exactly that to show people what happens when they pick an LS9 camshaft on a 4.8. A short runner intake manifold, also a terrible idea. You know, big. I think we put 317 heads on it. So we lowered the compression. We put the wrong cam. If I had a wrong cam shirt on, put the wrong cam. And the short runner intake. All of those are higher RPM things, which on a 4.8, guys can run higher. You can run higher RPM because it has a short stroke. That has no effect on that. But what it does do is kill all the low speed power. And so with a turbo, and we also put too big of a turbo on there. So we made everything bad. And what it does is just not want to spool at all until way later. And it would not be an enjoyable combination. But I had to, you know, an LS9 cam is a common cam for guys to buy because it's, or be given because it's gifted because it's cheap. And guys had replaced it with some other kind of cam that usually worked better and made more power. Short runner intakes, they're pretty. The fabricated sheet metal sniper kind of thing. They're pretty. They work good. Too big of a turbo. Very common mistake. 317 heads on. That's kind of old school now. And I think that fewer and fewer people are doing that, particularly on a 4.8. Like I said, on a 6 liter, I just leave them on there. But on a 4.8, I wouldn't put those on a 4.8 if I was trying to build a boosted 4.8. Late to the stream, but aren't heads literally everything and always matter? No, this was a nuance thing that we were talking about. Not a fan of the intake port on the 317 head. It looks like it will reflect any standing waves, mostly back of the runner and not effectively into the valve and chamber. The port on a 317 is the same as the port on a 799 or a 243. And I don't understand about the reflecting the standing wave. Are you talking about a reflected wave? What are you talking about? Because it's not going to do anything to a reflected wave. The reflected wave is going to go out and through the intake manifold into the common plenum and come back. Beginner question, does a single turbo spool different than a twin turbo? yes and no. If the twin turbos are sized to make the same power as the single turbo, the spool rate is going to be very, very comparable. If one of them is way bigger than the other, whichever way you went, the spool rate would be different. But it would be different if you just took two single turbos and made them different turbos, and one of them spools better than the other. So what you need to think about when you're getting a turbo is, what power output do I want? A turbo or turbos. What power output do I want? And then the single versus twin question is, do I like the way twins look? Who doesn't? But can I fit twins? And is that the way that I want to go? Then you start going down the road of, okay, what motor am I hooking this to? What's going to be your response rate is going to be a function of the NA power output, particularly down low. Is this thing making good torque? Do I have a long runner intake? Do I have not too much camshaft in it? Do I have a reasonable amount of compression? And then you start answering all of these other littler questions, but those are the big ones to start out with. How much injector do you need for 1,000 horsepower? You can get there with the 80 pounders on gas, but on E85, they're going to have to be more than that. Racer. Here's a problem I'm having. I run a distributor in my LS, and the timing is jumping around at least 15 degrees. But with a computer control your trigger on the crank, the engine will not run smooth. Why are you getting that sort of variation? We don't get that on a crank trigger or on a cam signal. It doesn't vary by that much. Is the distributor locked? Is there movement in the distributor drive or something? Airboats are about torque. Then I would put a low buck truck, an airboat truck cam. Slightly above average, 2.9 pulley LSA, LS1 with 243 heads, milled 20, 223 cam, 600 wheel horsepower, 560 foot-pounds, suffering a weird issue where my cluster dies after acceleration. The cluster inside the car? Is it loose and vibrating? I know that those clusters, there's a guy around the corner that does cluster rebuilding. And I don't know if it's for if that's an LS1, that's got to be a car. But I think I don't know if he only does trucks or not. It runs right up to 5,200, 5,500, and pulls load to 6,000 when the prop catches up. Okay. So I think you should be concerned with the power from 5,000 to 6,000 then maybe. But the way that it gets up there is still going to be affected by the rest of the curve, though. Hey, dogs, how about if you be quiet? There's nothing out there that you need to bark at. There's nothing that's going to get us. I guarantee you. Nothing out there wants any of what's in here. So where are we making peak power? Yeah, if you look at a 5.3 with a low buck truck camshaft or a truck Norris cam or Chupacabra kind of thing, you're looking at something that's going to make peak power about 6,000, and it's going to have, it's going to have really good torque at 5,000. In fact, peak torque is going to be 4,800. So I actually think that would be a good airboat cam. With 317s are not ideal on the 5.3, but would a small shot of nitrous wake up for the cubic inch difference of the 6-liter? Yes, a small shot of nitrous will add power to anything. It'll add power to a 4.8, a 5.3, a 6.0, all of that. You'll still with nitrous, you're adding to whatever is there. So with the 5.3 with 317s, it's just not going to have as much as it would if it had a 243 head or a 706 or an 862 head. And so you're adding, let's say you're adding 100 to that. Wherever you start out with, if you're starting at 300, then you get 400. If you're starting at 350, then you get 450. And so it's just going to add to whatever's there. Less compression for more boost used to be a thing. It still is, but you're on all of these factory LS motors, you're looking at something that's most of them, other than the high performance versions, all of the truck stuff is going to be, you know, between 9 and 10 to 1, which is fine for boost on the street. Eric, you got all the ads. They just follow you around. Cylinder 6 misfire, done the injector, plug, and coil, has compression. It's a 4.8. What do you think? Try switching stuff to another cylinder. I mean, if you've replaced all those, I wouldn't have replaced them. I would have just changed them to another cylinder to see if it's going on. Take a look at the harness. Make sure that the both the harness for the coil. Make sure that did you try the plug wire? Injector, plug, and coil. So check the plug wire or swap a plug. And this is the easy way to do it. Swap the plug wire. Check the wire in the harness going to the coil. Check the wire in the harness going to the cylinder and see, going to the injector and see if all of that's working. Any torque cam suggestions for my Swalbeck Chevy 350, 202s, upgraded spring, Edelbrock Performer RPM intake. I'd like to rev to 6,000, 6,500, keep a stock converter. So 6,500 power output is not going to be stock converter territory. So if you want a torque cam, that's not going to be a 6,500 RPM cam. That's probably not going to be a 6,000 RPM cam. At least it's not going to make peak power at 6,000 RPM. So I would look at an extreme energy like a 258 or something like that, maybe a 262 for a torque version. So like a 218, 224 kind of thing. If you want to go to 6,000, it's going to take more camshaft than that. Particularly with that cylinder head, unless the head's been ported. Not much about old Ford 7.3 liter DI diesels either. The cam lobe to work the stage 2 pump failed. Install the Bosch 044 electric pump, 90 psi going into Y pipes to both heads now. Cool. Because of the loose timing chain? Okay. Let's see. I was doing burnouts, not trying. Okay. Like it could be the neighbor skipping the message to the next coil. I don't know about an arcing situation, but I would just check and see which things are working. That way, if it changes to another cylinder, then you know, okay, that's the thing that changed it. What would your 6-liter combo for pulling cam and heads? You mean what one would I put together? But that's not a good metric for you. If you have a 6-liter and you just tell me what kind of power curve you want, and I could tell you how to get that. A lot of guys that do, and this is, in fact, this is probably more often the case than not. A lot of guys that say, yeah, I want a torque. I want to make lots of torque. Okay. You can take your 317 heads off and put 706 heads on. Yeah, but I have an LQ9. It's a flat top and I have a lot of compression. Yeah, and I want to run on 87. Okay, well, you shouldn't do that then. That's not a good choice because you're gonna have possibly have detonation issues. If you want to try to soften the chamber, you want to port it, you want to do something else, or if you're doing it with an LQ4, that's maybe a better choice. But for towing, mild cam, like that low buck truck camshaft, long tube headers. I don't think I do anything to the heads. If it's an LQ4, I might put 706 heads on it. But you're going to have to tune it after that. How much horsepower should 1,200-pound injectors support on a 5.3? Well, if you multiply that by 16, that will give you the NA power potential at a 0.5 brake specific. This is my 2011 EMC engine. I just took off the dyno 369. It made 615, 529 foot-pounds on 87 octane. Did you guys have to run 87 octane in the 2011 Engine Masters? And can't you just lock the distributor and make it be fixed? .317 head will need more boost to make the same power. Yeah, we went over all that because the compression ratio starting point. It's not just compression ratio. That head makes more power than the 317 head, not just because of compression. Yeah, the person that's getting a misfire or whatever, have you done a cranking compression test on it to make sure that has compression, that cylinder has compression? Also, I would check the rocker, take the valve cover off if you can. Check the rocker and make sure you don't have a broken spring. Stock intake manifold. Are there any street drivability concerns with the truck Norris cam on a 6-speed? No. If you tune it right, that will be fine. And on a 6-speed, if anything, rather than having a stock converter, the 6-speed would be more forgiving. I have it in my C1 Corvette. The engine is undrivable under 3,000 RPM because the timing is jumping around. Like with the LSD trigger, it will negate the timing chain slop. So why are you wanting to have a distributor on there? Why don't you get rid of that? And 15 degrees for timing stretch, and you can get rid of the slop because there are oversized timing gears and there are undersized chains now. So that's a thing now. So you can cure that problem if that's it. For a streetcar 5.3 with nitrous, do you like a ProCharger, positive displacement blower, or turbos? You're separating those into three things, right? Because a ProCharger is not positive displacement. But are you asking which one of those blowers that you like? For any given boost level, the turbo is going to make the most power because it doesn't have to drive a supercharger. But that's not the only reason that people pick stuff. I don't know what you're trying to do. I don't know what you're trying to achieve, but I can tell you that any of those are going to be fun. So do you have the budget to do all of those? And then which one of those things speaks to you? Luke, on an 06 GTO LS2 with a 454 cam, is there power to be had by swapping to an LS3 LSA heads and an LS3 intake manifold? D1Xs in the future, if that matters. Yes. If you have stock LS2 heads, LS3 heads, and an LS3 intake manifold will make more power than an LS2 head and LS2 intake manifold. And the blower is going to will work with either one of those. What would happen if I kept revving past the cam RPM range? No, if I'm telling you a motor makes peak power at 6,000 RPM, to give you an idea, at 6,000 RPM, it made peak power. At 6,500 RPM, it was only down 6 or 7 horsepower. If you're racing, you're going to be revving past the power peak anyway, because you're going to rev beyond the power peak and then have the RPM hopefully drop back on the other side of the power peak. And you're going to be going basically on, if you've got a got a horsepower peak that goes and comes down. That top part of that mountain is where you want to be shifting, because that will make the most, that will give you the best ET in mile an hour. LS1 GTO cluster, but learning curve, decent size cam and blower. Need to make sure you get a low vacuum bypass valve. Stock bypass valve wasn't working for me. Boost at 1600 is no bueno. Is that on the LSA blower? 1600 seems low. Or 68 with an LS3 head. Let's see. Okay, I'm back. Here's a question. Would only porting the bowl valve guide on a 243 head on the intake do the whole exhaust port make more power than just doing the intake port? I don't know. There's no way to answer that. My guess is if you partially ported the intake and ported the exhaust, you would get more power than if you went whole hog, because the area that you're talking about doing, like I would do the chamber too, but the bowl area is where you're going to get most of the flow gain from. The bowl area, then the short turn, then the rest of the port, and the chamber to me is more important than even the rest of the port. What do you think about the Summit 8801 cam for torque? I don't know. I'd need to know what the specs are. I don't know off the top of my head what all those cams are. I saw the 468 with the LS3 heads, but have you tested a big cubic inch with 243s or 706s? No, not on a 468. Not on anything that big. We tested them on a 408 stock ones, although no, they weren't 243s, they were 241s, I think. I hear engine masters. I don't think static timing. Lock the distributor. Well, if you hear for Steve and I and most of the people that are at West Tech are Freiberger and Dulcich and those guys. If you talk to anybody who has ever curved a distributor, if it's a performance curve for even a street or street strip car, it's all in by 3,000. So if we're starting our load at 3,000 and running from 3,000 to 6,500 with a carbureted, distributed small block or big block or whatever, the timing should be all in anyways. So locking the distributor doesn't really have an effect in that RPM range because it would be the same. All it does is take out any sort of distributor sticking or any sort of variable for that. So that works. Having seen what I've seen on fuel injected motors, I no longer think that that's a good idea, even though that had been the way that it was done for lots of distributor equipped carbureted motors back in the day, that you'd get it all in and it'd be accelerating and it'd feel good, it'd be responsive, and you'd have a recurve distributor and it would do all the magic stuff. When we run stuff on the engine dyno, especially if we run it like at 2,500, 3,000, 3,500, 3,000, 3,500 in that range, it doesn't want all of that timing. No LS wants 29 degrees of timing at none that I've ever seen wants 29 degrees of timing, which is what it wants at its power peak. It doesn't want that below the torque peak. And when I say it doesn't want that, I mean it doesn't want that. It doesn't respond to power. It makes the same power if you're not detonating. It makes the same power if we go down in timing. So what you want to do is put the amount of timing in it that makes the most power. So down at lower engine speeds, it doesn't need that much ignition advance to achieve that. So we have much less timing down in those lower RPM ranges. We don't have the lock distributor, although we've run many of them like that. But it helps if you're running them cold and you have good octane in there, and so you could get away with, what might be a detonation situation manifesting itself. Bought a Junkyard LM7, 140,000 miles, just getting broken in. Wanted to do a sloppy stage 2. Would you do anything else? Well, you're going to have to do springs at least and a tune. And then if you're putting it behind a 4L60E transmission, that might be problematic. But I would do headers on it too. 799s on an LQ4 under boost, too high for compression on heavy truck. No. No, those will be fine. Richard, you're missing the point. Even distributor is locked. It is still driven by the sloppy timing chain. You will not see this with the crank trigger. So are you saying that we have the wrong timing in our stuff? Because if that's what you're saying, that's not accurate. If you're having that problem, I understand that you're having that problem. But we know that we have enough timing in it to make the power that we're making because we tried going more and it doesn't do anything. And so when we get to the point where, and I don't even care what the number is, but if we go to this number and then we go up and it doesn't add any power, then it's this number is where it wants to be. And I don't care what you call that. And I don't care if there's a loose timing chain. That's how much power it's going to make. And that's where the timing wants to be. Gen 4 4.8 with 243 heads wants to make 500 horsepower without a turbo. Okay. You won't do that with that stock head. Mauricio, you can't do that with a 4.8 and that stock head. It won't make that much power. It won't do that with a stock intake manifold. No matter how much camshaft you put in it, you can't put enough camshaft in it in a 4.8 to use that head. That head's going to be restrictive. Even if you put a good intake manifold on it, you're going to have to do everything. We talked about this the other night. On a 4.8, you have to have a really serious aftermarket or fully ported stock head. And I wouldn't pick a 243 head unless you milled it. You're going to have as big a cam as you can put in there and with available piston and valve clearance. And you're going to have some sort of high RPM intake manifold, like a fast or even something that maybe wants to rev a little bit more than that. A 6-liter standard board, 823 head milled, 63 feet chambers. I want it to pull 2 to 5,000 NA. If that was your RPM range, I think that I would put a cathedral port head on it. I would put a 243 head on it. Or you just put a small camshaft in it. Because the A23 head, even milled down to 63 cc chambers, is because it has a big port volume and a big valve. So it's still going to be soft down low compared to a cathedral port head. But it will work. So if you want power in that range, then put a mild camshaft in it. I was watching a video where you were talking about hot side sizing for the turbo. A 78 millimeters, 3-inch pipe between 3 to 5 foot long out the fender. So it's 5 feet of 3-inch pipe. And what kind of 78 millimeter is it? What is the exit of the turbo? Looking at trick flow 215s, those are good. That holding on, those are really good heads. I strongly recommend those. The TFS 215 comp ported heads still go good on a 6-liter iron block when I swap over from the LS1 block. Yes. Yeah, those things flow enough to support a lot of NA power output. Whoever supplied this, thank you. But I don't, oh, here we go. Luke, I'm sorry, I didn't see your thing. I was scrolling here. Thanks for your input on the LS2 head swap. Trying to decide the next step in the combo past that 454 cam. I wanted to do a 469 cam. Was worried about drivability. Settle on the 454. That's a good cam. It makes good power, and should be more drivable than the 469 cam. Mark, you're making progress on your OEM ECU adventure. Cool. Gonna see if MBT tables really matter. Max slow for max torque on the muffler side, B&R. For highway cruising at 2200, you want at least 30 to 40 degrees of timing. Yep, that seems right. To get good gas mileage and let the engine run cool. All right, Todd, good. Let me know what happens, man. Trying to scroll back. Thought somebody else had a question here that I missed. I don't answer thoughts questions, so if you're asking thoughts questions, those are not going to get answered. Billet wheel, 78 millimeter eBay turbo. I think it's 3-inch out. And how much power are you trying to run with that thing? If it's 600 or 700 horsepower, you're probably fine. if it's more than that, then I would try putting a bigger exhaust on it. Like a chassis down is a good place to try stuff like that because it's really easy to do. 6 big block, a 206 cam. Idle vacuum is 20 inches. That's like stock idle vacuum. Idle timing is 12 degrees. Aaron, if it sits there and idles, I wouldn't change the timing. It might want a little more than that. I don't think it would hurt it at idle. Do high flow cats still restrict exhaust in your testing? I don't. When we run stuff on the engine dyno, we don't put cats on them. Richard, have you tested any Pro Max small block forward heads? Yes, I have. They work very well. I mean, I don't think that their airflow research well, but they did good. Got 1 more minute on a turbo LS. Will the 317 heads ever make more power than the 706 heads under boost? Got 46% saying yes. I don't know what they flow, so I'm not going to answer. But would a different shape alone of the heads through port work make a difference? Are you just changing? I don't know why you're talking about shape. Why you just want to change the shape? Wouldn't you want there to be more flow? A really good rule of thumb is if you take a cylinder head and you port the cylinder head, does it make more power NA? If it makes more power NA, it's going to make more power under boost. 212, 218. Does it sound like a decent torque cam? Yeah, that's right in the range of a torque cam. If that's your, what was that, the 350? BNR, the question on the timing, I think, was an idle timing question. The deck thickness is the weak point for pretty much all LS heads. My question is there a factory LS head that has the deck thickness of an aftermarket head? No, there's not. It might be that and somebody else might be able to answer this. I thought that I was told that either the material or the process in making the LS9 head might make it stronger. Does that cam sound like it would work with a stock converter and a turbo 350? Yeah, 212 cam should work. I need to buy a Metro pressure plate. I found a clutch. I need to buy a pressure plate so I can swap the Sprint motor into the Metro. Because, you know, turbo is all the thing. The C6 Corvettes had centrifugal spun cast aluminum heads. There are some good but budget cam bearings. I don't think I would be the guy to answer that. I don't think I've ever installed LS cam bearings that I can remember. I think Brule maybe he might have had the tool to do that. But if I'm going to put cam bearings in something, the block is over at the machine shop to have other things done normally, and I have them do that. We're live. It's all the way live. So before I go, shout out to the guys at Brian Tooley Racing, who I think right now is an LS Fest going on right now, I think. And the guys at Airflow Research and Vortec and all those guys. Thanks for helping out. I wish I was over at LS Fest if they're there right now. Ben, I don't know how well your excuse me, dang it. I don't know how well your 241 porting job is. So if they were 241s ported professionally, like by the guys at Total Engine Airflow, those heads would make more than a stock 821 head would. A stock 241 head is not going to be anywhere near what an 821 head is. It's going to be 30 horsepower down. So have you done a good enough porting to offset that amount? The 241 head is going to make more power down low than the 821 head is, because cathedral port heads do typically, and you have more compression too. Richard, do you think you'll make custom small but Chevy cams? I don't think so. Hashtag turbo. I know I'm actually out of shirts right now, except for 3X. 3X sizes, I have red and blue. And I think that I have one, so if somebody wants it, I have one red large. Otherwise, the only things I have left are the 3X. So it's time to order more shirts, obviously. And also time for me to not order lots of 3X shirts. more large to large, XL, and 2X seem to be the best sellers. Holding on, that turbo will be fine. I wouldn't pick a stage 2 turbo cam unless you already have it, but a 366 will be responsive. And if they're certainly capable of doing 650 wheel horsepower. The LS test is going on now is back in, I think it's in Bowling Green, right? I got Cleveite mains and rods. Just didn't get the cam from them. That's where I'm going. There's lots of good bearing companies. I haven't had any problems with them other than we did measure differences in bearing thicknesses from different manufacturers that were rated, that were designated as the same, but they were not exactly the same. But you have to be pretty good with the mic to, because you're looking at tenths of a thou, not just tenths. Tenths would be a big difference. And on that note, it is time to go. You guys all have a good Saturday, and I will see you guys all tomorrow. We are at the end of what is this? August. So we're going into September. Last 4 months of the year. Got to finish strong. Lots of testing. I got lots more testing that I want to do. So I want to get it all done by the end of the year. But I'll see you guys all tomorrow.